And we are live for the 29th edition of the Trekkie Awards. With me, as always, is Bill. Bill, if someone is living under a rock in the far reaches of the galaxy, what is the Trekkie Awards?
The Trekkie Awards are Oscar-style, fittingly for today, um, awards for season-specific Star Trek stuff. So I started it when I did my first kind of Twitter rewatch where I was reviewing episodes as I went, and I thought a fun way to like add a unique spin to that whole thing, because a lot of people do that, was to kind of look at each individual season and try to analyze the best of various angles of the filmmaking and the production of the shows. So I would try to watch through that lens, which also gave me like a fun new way to rewatch the stuff that I've watched many times. I was looking for, okay, what would make a good nominee for best art direction in Enterprise season 3? Like what episodes really stand out as far as that specific category. So I've done that for 28 seasons of Star Trek up until now. All the seasons of Enterprise, TNG, TOS, DS9, Voyager, all that stuff as I went through it. And this is today going to be the 29th edition for Star Trek Discovery Season 1. That's the first time I've done it for a show, obviously, that's like running like currently. It's a totally kind of a different experience. I'm not trying to wade through years and years and years of dozens of watches and history with the episodes. It's all kind of fresh and new, and so it was a challenge to come up with nominations, and it was a challenge to pick my own winners. And it's been a blast, kind of working through that process on Twitter and talking to people like everybody who watches this show, who interacts with us on Twitter, and Dan, of course, leading up to this, and trying to get my thoughts in order and put out a good representation of what I think is the best of Discovery Season 1. That's the important thing to remember here. These are me. This isn't, there's obviously no, like, I don't have ownership over the truth here. This isn't like the end all be all. This is my interpretation. So I would encourage everybody to put out your own too. Like try to come up with your own list. If you don't like the fact that I didn't nominate Jason Isaacs for series lead, which is a point of much contention out there for Daniel and many others. Tell me what you would do. Like, what are your 5? What would you do? That's the interesting part of this. It's fun to put my own together, but I like even more hearing what everybody else thinks and kind of gathering everybody's opinions together and seeing what the consensus sort of looks like. So looking forward to getting these out there and hearing what other people have to say. I'm looking forward to hearing Dan. You pick your choices. Curious to see how many times we kind of line up. I think we probably will here and there. I'm not sure that we'll line up every single time. And anybody who's here, I want to hear what you have to say. Pick your winner. Tell me what you think the best one is, and tell me even more kind of importantly, what's off the list. What didn't I nominate that should have been? What did I forget about? Did I nominate something that is crazy and just shouldn't be there, in your opinion? All that stuff is fair game as we kind of go through this. And I'm going to try to type stuff into the chat as we go a little bit here and there, like just so that there's kind of a record in the chat in case people are popping in late and maybe miss a few categories, so there'll be a record of it. So feel free to jump in and, share your opinion on whatever you feel like.
Yep. And we're super excited because this is the first Trekkie Awards hosted on the Trek Live YouTube channel, so we're super excited. This isn't our usual show, so the structure is going to be a little bit different. Obviously, our attire is a little bit different.
Yes.
This is a big moment for a lot of us. So
yes.
Yep.
It's a big Trek Live day. It's a momentous occasion.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to maybe doing something similar to this in the future. As we watch more Trek going forward. If we're doing any future rewatches, wink wink, we might do similar things in the future with the Trekkie Awards, if especially people are into this kind of thing as much as we are. So let us know what you think. If you think this is a good idea for the channel, and if you like this kind of content, let us know, and we'll certainly have our ears open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So should we just jump right into it and go with our first category here?
I think we should.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So just a little bof background. What we're going to do is we're each going to share our pick, and I'm also going to kind of highlight some social media stuff. Some of all of the technical categories, things like cinematography, visual effects, editing. I was able to put polls out there, like clean Twitter polls, because there are 3 nominees for each category. So I'll talk a little bit about the poll results as well for those. For the more hardcore categories, actor, series lead, guest star, episode, there are 5 nominees. So it wasn't possible to put a clean poll out there. So I just kind of phrased the question. And some of the results on those questions are a little more inconclusive. We got some good responses, but not necessarily as easily tracked, and not quite as many as some of the polls did. So we'll highlight some of those responses and talk a little bit about what people had to say about those categories as well. But I kind of want to start off in the same order we went the other day when we revealed the nominations. We're going to start at the bottom of the list. And this is in no order of like preference or anything, or like category importance. They're all important. But the bottom one on my Word document I have sitting here right next to me is best visual effects, which I know, Dan, it should be at the top. I know.
Yes, it should.
It's the clearly most important category. So we're starting with a big one. We'll just call it that. The nominations for best visual effects are Battle at the Binary Stars, Into the Forest I Go, and What's Past is Prologue. So Dan, what would your choice be of those 3 episodes?
My choice would be Into the Forest I Go.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And just real quick, in the description down below, you guys can use the hashtag Trekkie Awards along with the hashtag Trek Live and on social media, and we can find it easily that way. Back to you, Bill.
Yeah. What about Into the Forest I Go really stands out for you?
I think it has a good balance of obviously great battle sequences as visual effects, but also kind of other visual effects that kind of snuck up on me. So like when they're in the cargo bay and there's this big wide open scene of the planet, and it's and they're just talking, and you just kind of forget. So those type of shots.
Yeah. There is some really iconic imagery in that episode that I know I've told you a couple of times just in talking offline. When I would rewatch the show, I would often, I think, send you pictures of the there's this shot in Into the Forest I Go with the Klingon ship of the dead decloaking in orbit of the planet with the Discovery off in the distance, and there's a moon and the planet, and there's like debris coming off the ship when it's decloaking. Like, it's just gorgeous visual. It's a beautiful image, and it's probably my favorite, like, frame it and put it up as a poster in your room kind of shot from Discovery's first season.
Yep.
And there's a lot of great imagery in it. There's that great shot that I saw mentioned on Twitter. I think Jim from Truck Ranks, in his defense of this pick, I think this was his choice, talked about the scene in the shuttle bay with Lorca and Stamets as they're kind of like going away from the planet with the shuttle bay door open, and that image is really kind of memorable too. So it's a really good pick. I did not choose it, surprisingly. I went in a different direction, but that was definitely my second choice.
Okay.
I picked Battle of the Binary Stars because maybe I'm falling prey to, like, instead of best visual effects, maybe I went with most visual effects. I don't know. I think the battle featuring so many ships, and it was such the driving force of that episode. I kind of had a hard time turning away from that one. As far as like Star Trek television goes, and even maybe the movies, that's probably the biggest space battle we've ever seen in Star Trek on just like a grand scale. With, we saw some big time stuff in Deep Space Nine, obviously. That was pretty a lot of amazing battle sequences in the Dominion War, featuring a lot of ships and big time epic stuff. But Battle of the Binary Stars does it, with 2018, 2017 visual effects, and I think it really pops. I'm thinking of the Europa showing up and tractoring the Shenzhou out of harm's way, and the collision between the Europa and the other Klingon ship. Like there's some big time stuff happening in that episode, and I think the visual effects really drive that story a lot. And I'm thinking of the image, like the visual of Burnham sitting in the blown out brig. There's a lot of memorable stuff in that episode too.
Not just battle sequences.
Not even just the battle sequences, right?
Totally agree.
So that was my choice, but Into the Forest I Go. I really struggled with this. I didn't settle on this choice until yesterday. There's other great stuff in Into the Forest I Go. Another thing that I really think about a lot with that episode is the image of the Discovery micro jumping around the ship of the dead is such a cool thing that we've never seen before. So they're all good choices. What's Past is Prologue. Rob is sharing right now that was his choice.
Yeah, that was a tough pick too. Also,
it was that the ending of that episode, that battle sequence, the way the Discovery gets back home, sort of a little ahead of time, but flying through the mycelial, whatever that was, the reactor, I guess, and warping away from it and staying ahead of the shockwave, like all that stuff's really cool Star Trek stuff. It felt like I was watching Star Trek 100%. So they're all good, I think.
Yeah,
and there are other episodes as well.
All of them.
Yeah, this is a really tough one, and trying to get to the Twitter poll here. Memory serves. I should have been more prepared. This is a really close vote on Twitter. Battle of the Binary Stars won with 44% of the vote. What's Past is Prologue had 31, and Into the Forest I Go had 25. So this was not, unlike some of these other categories, a lopsided choice. Some of these categories are a little more like this is the clear pick. This one was a pretty wide range. There were 52 votes on that poll, so there was a pretty decent sample size. It's not a huge number or anything, but it's a solid group of people voting, and all three of those episodes had a respectable showing. And I think, like you said, Dan, there's a really strong case to be made for all of them. And Rob citing in What's Past is Prologue, the visuals of the Lorca Giorgio Burnham Landry fight scene on the ship at the end too is
that's a great
set piece.
Great draft too.
Yeah. So this was one of the tougher ones for me. I really kind of struggled with settling on a choice on this one. So next category we have Best Musical Score, which was another tough one for me that I struggled with until yesterday. Nominees are Into the Forest I Go, Magic to Make the Satan's Man Go Mad, and The Vulcan Hello, the pilot. Dan, what's your choice?
This is a tough one because I'm not really the musical guy. So I went with The Vulcan Hello because I feel like, to me, it set the tone for kind of the rest of the scores in the show. So that's kind of why I went with it. You guys can just disagree with me, but that's what I went with.
I don't disagree with you. That was my choice as well. I agree with your point that it does set the musical tone of the show. It defines the whole score of the series. But I think it's got some really big set pieces in it too. Some really good tracks. I'm thinking of the score in the scene. The score at the very beginning of the episode. The Klingon stuff at the very beginning, but when they're on the planet, and they get rescued with the classic Star Trek cue thrown into it, when the Shenzhou pulls up and grabs them and flies off into space. Really cool, like wow, Star Trek's back moment. Really good music there. I think the scene with Burnham just doing the flyby to go see what that object was that kind of kickstarted the whole thing. That's a really long track with like like 7 or 8 straight minutes of music that I think is really, really great stuff.
Mhm.
I just for all that, I think this is my choice. I struggle with this a lot. I kind of talked when we revealed the nominations. When I do Trekkie Awards for the first season of any of the shows, really, one of the bigger challenges is how to weigh the pilot episode. In Deep Space Nine season 1, when I'm doing these, Emissary is really, really great, and it's clearly one of the standout episodes of the season. But for some of these categories, like score, like art direction, costume design, because it's the pilot and it's establishing everything, it's hard to turn away from choosing it in a lot of respects, because the scale of it is just so big. So in a lot of these, if you go back and you look at any of my old stuff with TNG season 1, Voyager season 1, Enterprise, the pilots, Broken Bow, Caretaker, Emissary, and Counter Farpoint, they all have pretty strong showings because of the scale of the production, defining the visual and musical language of the show. And this is a kind of a repeat case here with, at least in this category, where I think the Vulcan Hello really does a lot to define what Discovery is from that angle, musically. Rob is saying that he chose Magic to Make the Same Man Go Mad.
Great pick.
The retro disco music at the Discovery party, yeah. And that's a good segue, because the Twitter poll shows Magic to Make the Same Man Go Mad, which does not surprise me. It does have a really unique score. I think it kind of stands on its own, and that's kind of the ongoing theme with that episode. As I've had different kind of conversations about kind of summing up Discovery season 1, and all kinds of questions asking, what people thought of the season. Magic to Make the Same Man Go Mad is an episode that gets cited a lot because of how it stands alone and how it works as a standalone episode. And the music is no exception to that. I think it's got some great cues in it. It's unique. It's a lot of it's not like tracked music, as they call it, like episode, Discovery does it, and a lot of old Star Trek did it too, where you kind of take cues from other episodes and use them as needed in other things. You hear, in rewatching it, I noticed a lot. If you pay attention to the music in like the previously on segment, at the very beginning of the episode, you'll hear that cue a lot in the show, in different episodes, all the way through it, all the way to the finale. But Magic to Make the Same Man Go Mad does a little bit of that. There's moments that use previously cued music, but there's a lot of unique standalone stuff in that too. So I'm not surprised that was the pick, but that was another really close vote. That was 38% for Magic to Make the Same Man Go Mad, 33% for Into the Far Side Go, and 29% for the Vulcan Hello.
Dang, I love
so that's another one. That's even that and visual effects, I think, were the closest polls. That's one that, a couple of votes could have swayed it in any of those episodes' direction.
Yep.
And they're all worthy. Again, Into the Far Side Go, again, it has some really great stuff in it. That scene that I talked about, I always talk about that moment with the Ship of the Dead decloaks. That score is awesome.
Yes.
Over that scene. The score over the Ship of the Dead exploding, after the Discovery blows it up. Like, there's some really unique, interesting music in that scene that I think was only used once. You only heard it in that scene. And it's just such a big episode where so many big things are happening. It really underscores a lot of it. Yep. So all three, I think, are good picks. There's other great scores throughout the show. This was a tough category to narrow down to pick only 3 nominees. So if anybody thinks we left any off, if there's other episodes that merit discussion, feel free to throw them out there, and I'll be happy to think about them, talk about them. Next category is one that I always kind of struggle with, because it's one that I have the least amount of knowledge and the least amount of, some of these other categories. I think just from watching television, watching movies, it's easy to kind of pick up on, like, what makes good art direction, what makes good costume design. Like, they pop, and there are things that are kind of pretty easily noticed and easy to talk about. But film editing is one that I always kind of have to stretch and really think about. And that's what we're on now. So the nominees are Into the Farce I Go and Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad. Like I talked about in the nominations episode from last week, I think this is a pretty unique, a pretty wide-ranging group of episodes. You have two that are really kind of flashy editing with Lethe and Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad.
for sure.
Really doing unique stuff with the structure of the episode and doing creative things. And then Into the Farce I Go, I think, is really it's more conventional from that perspective, but there's so much happening in the episode. It's balancing so many different storylines, and I think it's paced like a freight train. So it merits some consideration there too. So, what do you think, Dan?
This is a tough call for me. I changed my pick this morning. So my pick is Lethe.
Nice.
I think because I like that the structure of the show kind of translates into the editing, because it's a ticking time. They've got only so much time, and I like the contrast in editing between Lorca and Cornwell, and kind of slow, intimate shots and cuts and stuff like that, to kind of fast-paced shuttle editing. So those are my reasons why I chose Lethe.
It's a great pick, and you're pretty convincing. You have me reconsidering. I picked Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad, but I agree with everything you just said. It does. It's kind of the tale of two episodes. You have the really much more fast paced, much more in your face ness of the Burnham on the shuttle dealing with Sarek.
Yeah, flashbacks and that stuff.
Yeah, there's so much happening there, and it's exciting and you know, kind of classic science fiction Star Trek stuff happening there. And then on the ship, you have this really introspective, character study going on with Lorca and Cornwell, which is even more complicated later on when you know what's really going on there. Like when we were watching it initially, we thought it was one thing, and then going back and watching it again, knowing what's coming, it's all other stuff too. So it's a really an episode that really is kind of, I think, defined by Lethe. But I did pick Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad because again, kind of maybe similar to visual effects. Maybe I just picked the most editing, like the most like flashy in your face because of the obvious timey-wimey, jumping stuff happening in that. That's an episode that really is, again, like Lethe, I agree, really kind of defined by its editing. It works because it's edited that way. I think it's easy to, in an episode where you're dealing with, repeating time loops and having to re-explore the same scene over and over again. I think they did a really nice job of doing that in a way that doesn't get boring. Like they don't replay the same things too long, too much. They kind of always, each time they go back to the beginning, they find a way to cut around everything that is the standard stuff that is always going to be the same, and they kind of jump right to what makes this loop different without losing the audience. It didn't lose me, and judging by the reaction out there and the common choice that it is for people's favorite episode, it didn't lose other people too. And it's fun, it's fast paced, it's exciting. It moves really fast. So I'm probably a typical Oscar voter who is maybe judging these things from a very broad view and without knowledge of like the day-to-day grind of doing that job, and I'm just kind of picking what really stands out to me from a distance, and it kind of pushed me in the direction of Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad for this one. The Twitter poll in this one was an odd one. It's really a tale of these two episodes. 55% said Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad. 39% said Lethe. So they're fairly close. And then 6% said Into the Farce I Go. So people were clearly drawn to the more the more unique episodes with this in mind. It was the two episodes that we kind of talked about here. But it's another one where, just a handful of votes could have swayed it in Leafy's direction. It was not a runaway.
Yeah.
They both left Into the Forest I Go in the dust, but those two episodes are very close, and that makes sense to me because I do think it's a really tough choice. Let's go next to costume design. We have Despite Yourself, Vaulting Ambition, and the Vulcan Hello. What do you got?
These next two categories were super hard. I went round and round all week, looking at pictures. It was tough. I went with the Vulcan Hello because to me I think that it's tough because I think that it kind of set the tone again for the rest of the show. I'm a big fan of the uniforms and kind of all the Klingon stuff. So that's kind of why I went with that, because I really have a special place in my heart for the Klingon stuff, and I love that they put so much attention to detail in that. So that's why I went that way.
It's definitely a really good pick, and it's another case of I could easily have gone that way because of, like I just kind of talked about with musical score. Anytime you're factoring the Vulcan Hello into these kinds of things, it's really it merits a lot of consideration because of how it defines the rest of the show. All of the episodes, really all of the other choices in this category are building off of what the Vulcan Hello did. Despite Yourself with Mirror Universe stuff, and Vaulting Ambition with some more Mirror Universe stuff, some more extravagant Mirror Universe stuff, with like Emperor Georgiou's stuff, and it's all there because it's an extrapolation from what the Vulcan Hello did. So it's
I get what you're saying with the pilots. You were talking about that before, and how so I think that's kind of thing I'm struggling with, but yeah, go ahead.
I always do. It's always really, really a challenge. And in this one, I agree with you. I went with Hello because of that. I up until yesterday had Despite Yourself written down. I was going to do that because I love the Mirror Universe costumes. I love the diversity of those costumes. Like, they're not all the same. Like, they Tilly's outfit, the captain outfits are very different than the standard crew. And they're credible. Like, they're not over the top and silly like it can be sometimes tempting to do with the Mirror Universe. I love what Despite Yourself does with the Mirror Universe visual language. But I'm falling victim. It's not really falling victim. It's not a bad thing. It's just I think an unavoidable fact that when you're talking about the first season of the show, that the pilot does so much to make everything else that's going to come after it possible, and all the other spins on it are there because of what the Vulcan Hello did. So I did go with the Vulcan Hello. From a bigger, like, broad view of the series, I love these uniforms a lot. They've grown on me a lot as time has gone on. They're some of my favorites. So just that alone makes it easy to choose this. But in addition to that, like you said, the Klingon stuff, it's so big. Like, how many different Klingon outfits are in that Ship of the Dead stuff in that episode? Like, you see at least 6 or 7, I think, variations on that. And Takuvma's costume is, some people will say, oh, it's not that practical. Who's going to go to battle like that? Well, he's not going into battle. He's a ceremonial leader trying to do something ceremonial. He's bringing people together and trying to make an impression. He's not. I don't think he would, if he's going onto a planet to do hand-to-hand combat with, Federation troops or something. He's not going to wear that. He's wearing that for a reason, and it does make an impression. It is imposing and memorable, and like, wow, it makes a big impact. So I love all that, and it just establishes the visual look of the show. So Vulcan Hello did well here for me. I felt I didn't feel like I had a choice, but the Twitter poll went with Despite Yourself, which doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah.
Rob made his case.
Yep.
The Mirror Universe costumes, and like I said, I had that written down until yesterday morning. So can't really argue with people's passion on that one. I've kind of already talked about it. I think it's really easy to go down an over the top, silly road with the Mirror Universe, and this resists that. It's fitting and makes sense, but it's not over the top and it's not overdone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Vaulting Ambition is another one. I toyed with that idea. I think Emperor Georgiou's costume is ridiculous and over the top, but it works for what that is. That's the one time where I think it does kind of veer into that crazy territory. But that works for me because it's not like the whole universe is that way. She's the Emperor. She's in a position of incredible power, and it sets her apart, and it's memorable, and I think going to be like iconic Star Trek imagery. Emperor Georgiou standing there on that throne, and Vaulting Ambition is going to be something that we see in Star Trek books for years and years to come, like as a standard like Discovery picture.
Yeah.
All right. So we got that done.
Yep.
Art direction, which is pretty similar to costume design in my book. I have Vaulting Ambition, The Vulcan Hello, and Will You Take My Hand?
Again, this is a tough pick for me. I just changed it this morning. It was tough. But I'm gonna have to go with Vaulting Ambition, and I think it's specifically not just the costumes, but just everything, and I think it fits to the Mirror Universe so well, and it kind of changed my view on the Mirror Universe because I wasn't the biggest fan of the Mirror Universe, so that's why I went with Vaulting Ambition.
I did too. Okay. For me, the Trekkie Award goes to Vaulting Ambition. It's that set of the throne room is one of the more impressive Star Trek sets I think I've ever seen. It's so imposing and larger than life, and it's something we've never seen before in Star Trek. It's just, when I think of that episode, as we've kind of talked about on this show, it's not my favorite episode of Discovery. It's towards the bottom of my list, actually. I think it's kind of problematic in some ways for me. I know a lot of people disagree with that, and some people are, very on board with that episode. There are things about it that I like, but something that is undeniable is, when I think of Vaulting Ambition, the first thing that pops into my head is that image at the beginning of the episode when they walk into that throne room. And it is a wow moment. And this was a tough one because of all the things we've already talked about with Vulcan Hello. It's difficult to not pick the sets that we get in the Vulcan Hello. The Shenzhou is really impressive, and that Ship of the Dead, those sets are insane too. They're incredible sets. Big and immersive, and just on another scale, like on another level from what we're used to in television Star Trek. But I think Vaulting Ambition, just my gut instinct whenever I think about this category, it was always that. As soon as I saw it, this is one that was easy. I wasn't even really thinking about the Trekkie Awards yet when I was watching the show for the first time. Like as I was watching each episode for the first time, this is something that I think about more when I'm rewatching and kind of analyzing and that angle. But when I'm sitting there watching Vaulting Ambition for the very first time that night, I immediately, as soon as I saw that set, I go, well, that category's done.
Yep.
Like, it's done deal. There's nothing that's going to come in this season that's going to top that.
Will You Take My Hand was close for me, but I think that Vaulting Ambition, like you said, has the whole package and was the clear winner for sure.
For me, yeah. Will You Take My Hand has some really impressive stuff too. Like you kind of said, it was definitely in the conversation. The market, the Orion Embassy.
Yes.
There's a lot of impressive stuff.
Yep.
In that episode, I kind of even like the I don't even know what it was, like the auditorium that Burnham is in speech at the end. It's so similar to
Yeah.
the 2009.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, that just, I like that. I
Yeah.
like the visual continuity there.
Mm.
And so that episode was tough for me to leave off too. You know, whenever a lot of these categories, because we're only picking 3, these are my 3 like hardcore favorites in these categories. So they're all in the conversation for me.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of goes without saying, but this was another really tough one. They're all tough. I mean, I'm going to say that about every single one of these categories, but this one, it was tough in the sense that I feel bad leaving off the Vulcan Hello, especially because of the pilot nature of it all, and that Ship of the Dead set. But I can't turn back from that initial reaction I had watching Vaulting Ambition for the first time, and thinking that it was over that night. And Twitter agrees with us. 56% went with Vaulting Ambition. 27% went with Will You Take My Hand, and 17% went with the Vulcan Hello.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe some people, this is just a guess, you know, because these polls are not, they're not scientific, and you know, they're not huge sample sizes, and I'm certainly not into heads when they're choosing. But I can imagine that maybe you and I are thinking, I don't know, maybe some people don't take the pilots into that much. Maybe they don't weigh the pilots as heavily as maybe we do. I don't know. I always, like I said, struggle with that, and sometimes I feel like it's not fair to compare the pilot to some of these other episodes. That just
Totally
the nature, it's not. They're not operating on the same. You know, the pilot, it has a built-in handicap in a lot of these things. Of course, like, it's establishing everything, and I think maybe sometimes I have to assume that some people have an easier time of like cutting off the standard series establishing stuff and not kind of counting that and just looking at, you know, stuff specific to that episode and not so much bigger series things.
Yeah, I struggle with that with movies. Always, especially in, like, if it's a series or a trilogy or something like that. I always think the first one's the best.
Absolutely.
But it's just tough.
It's a natural, I think, battle to deal with.
Yeah.
I see, just kind of going back, Thad picked Will You Take My Hand for Art Direction. I think that's a very valid pick. Just to throw you a bone there, Thad. Jim from Enterprise Extra, Jim from Trek Ranks, also, I think, in responding to the Twitter poll, picked Will You Take My Hand. So you have some backup there. It's a popular pick that I can't argue with much. The last of these technical categories before we get into the more heavy hitter things, we have Best Cinematography with Despite Yourself, The Vulcan Hello, and The Wolf Inside. What do you think?
I'm gonna go with Despite Yourself. For kind of one reason that kind of stood out to me, when Ash Tyler is in the worker bee.
Yes.
That whole thing was really jarring, and you kind of got his feeling, but they used, like, the camera angles and a little bit of the editing to kind of make you feel like he's definitely just disjointed. So that's why I picked that for sure.
I can't argue with that. I've talked about that on the show. I remember talking about it in our episode after that episode aired on Trek Live. That I thought that cinematography really popped. In that scene in particular, there's shots in that worker bee that are really cool. And I think another thing I'll say about Despite Yourself is, like we talked about that night in the immediate aftermath of that episode airing. That episode is so full of exposition and establishing things. Like, not much really happens in it, setting up what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 episodes. But it's so visually dynamic and exciting. And that is a credit to Frakes directing it and the cinematography, I think. Being creative with getting every ounce of excitement out of these dialogue-driven expository scenes, talking about where they are and why they are and how they got there. You have the science behind it and theorizing about how the spore drive got them there. And what they have to do to get out, and it's such a dialogue driven episode, but it's so visually dynamic at the same time, which is a credit to the director and the cinematographer, I think.
Yeah, because I think they needed that, because without that, it would just be boring talking heads, and then we would be in season 1 of TNG.
Yeah, indeed.
So, yeah. All right.
Good point.
Yes.
For me, the Trekkie Award goes to The Wolf Inside.
Okay.
There's a line in the beginning of that episode when Burnham is narrating. I guess it's a scene where she's talking to Tyler. Really, it's like a long scene where she's got a monologue, and at the end of the teaser, it kind of reveals she's talking to Tyler. And she talks about even the light here is different. And I'm thinking of like all the scenes in her quarters where this like weird washed out light is pouring into her quarters, and which makes sense because they talk about, you know, the one biological difference from the Mirror Universe characters is that they're more sensitive to light.
Yes.
And that makes sense because everything's darker. The light is more washed out and bland and dull.
Yeah.
And then I think of the scene on the planet. I think that is, I said on the episode that we did in the aftermath of that, of The Wolf Inside, that I thought the planet side stuff in The Wolf Inside was as good as the planet side stuff in Beyond, in a lot of the feature films.
Yeah.
Just like the impressive scope of it. Like, I just think they really capture, like, this is an alien planet. And I credit the cinematography for that. I think the scene in Burnham's quarters with Tyler's meltdown into Voke, Voke coming out, I guess, is really well shot. It grabs every ounce of tension and desperation that's happening in that, and I remember really being on the edge of my seat. And it's not just the performances; it's the way it's shot, it's the way it's filmed. It puts you right in the middle of that. You're not at a distance watching it happen. You're like right there with him in the middle of that conversation. So there's a lot of memorable imagery in The Wolf Side for me. I think it really sells that the Mirror Universe is a different place and it's a scary place. The Shenzhou is not a pleasant place to be in the Mirror Universe. And I think the cinematography really sells that. So it's another tough one for me. I think all three of these, again, not like a broken record, are valid choices. And that's going to be represented by this. The Twitter response was for the Vulcan Hello. So the three of us have chosen the three nominees. Wow. I think that's the first time that's happened, where we have the gamut covered here.
Yep.
I think all three merit discussion, and I'm glad that we all picked something. The Vulcan Hello, I can only imagine, is, you know, the stuff on the Ship of the Dead, again, is really impressive. I think the planet side stuff in the very beginning of the episode, again, is really, really impressive. It really sells they're on an alien planet. They're not on a backlot soundstage or anything like that. It really feels alien and different. And again, you know, I certainly can't argue with Vulcan Hello because it does establish the visual language of that show. The entire look of Discovery is completely, you know, built in and sold in the Vulcan Hello. So I think all three of these choices are really good. You know, I see Thad agreed with you, Dan, on Despite Yourself.
Yep.
The sequence where they're changing everything to look like they belong in the Mirror Universe worked really well. I think that's a credit to the cinematography. I think that's shot really well. The camera's moving, and it's exciting, and the editing of that montage is really cool. So that's a highlight in Despite Yourself for me. That's a really good pick. And Rob picked The Wolf Inside, agreed with me, and he cited the close-up shots of Tyler Voke coping with discovering who he is and the PTSD. So another really tough category that is well represented here between you and me and people out there in Twitter and Trek Live community. So that's going to do it for the technical categories. And I think the one thing to kind of take away, kind of just to talk about, you know, the technical categories as a whole, is it kind of comes from a pretty wide range of episodes here. We've all kind of talked about, we talked in depth about Lethe. We've talked about Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad. We've certainly talked about the Vulcan Hello. Battle of Binary Stars got love. Despite Yourself got love. Wolf Inside got love. Ultimate Ambition got love. So it's really a testament to how technically impressive the show is. We're not citing 3 episodes out of the season where all the technical stuff is really shining. Like they dumped all their money into, these handful of episodes, and they really put it out there in them. It's a wide range of choices here that all merit getting cited and getting some love in these categories.
Yeah. I think that it's just this kind of evolved, I guess, because I feel like some of these categories don't play as much into kind of the older episodes of Trek, whereas I feel like all of these kind of categories and kind of people make a great episode. So
for sure, yeah. I mean, things like, just because of the budgetary nature of that are really, really great. I mean, don't take me wrong here when I say what I'm about to say, but just the nature of television in the 90s and the 60s, certainly. Sometimes in some of those seasons, pulling together 3 nominees that really stand out and really are unique for things like art direction or visual effects. There are seasons where it's a more challenge to come up with 3 that really stand out, where Discovery, just because of the nature of their budget and production values that this television gets today, the challenge is more like picking 3. Like
we don't have enough spots.
Yeah, exactly. Again, no disrespect, when I'm talking about TNG season 2 and I'm talking about Q-Who getting the Trekkie Award for visual effects or art direction, it's incredible work, especially for 1988 television. Like, there's incredible craftsmanship, and that's why I love Trek. Like the ingenuity of the production, and that's a big part of why I love it so much. So no disrespect, but it's a different beast, and it's because of television, what television is today, more than what television was then. All right, so we're going to get into some more heavy hitting categories now. These are nominees, categories that have 5 nominees instead of 3. Like I said at the beginning here, there's no Twitter poll to fall back on here in these categories, because I can't put 5 things on a poll. So I just kind of phrased the question and took whatever responses I got. And when we go to that part of this, where we'll talk about like the community response, I'll take a peek at Twitter and see what kind of responses pop out at me, and I'll cite some here and there.
Okay.
But let's do this first. Best Director. We have Akiva Goldsman for Context is for Kings. We have Jonathan Frakes for Despite Yourself. We have Chris Byrne for Into the Forest I Go. We have Olatunde Asansami for What's Past is Prologue, and TJ Scott for The Wolf Inside. What do you think, Dan? You have one that...
I went with the canned answer. I went with Jonathan Frakes because, Bill, you kind of alluded to it before. Not a lot happens in Despite Yourself, but I think that Frakes does a great job of kind of creating something out of nothing almost. But at the same time, I don't like that term. So, I mean, I think he just did a good job for kind of the story that he had and making it interesting. So that's why I went with Jonathan Frakes. And he's also a seasoned veteran. So
absolutely, yeah. Frakes is somebody that I gave a lot of consideration to. I think I said when we immediately talked about Despite Yourself, I thought Frakes really hit it out of the park, and I made a point to say that if his name was Jonathan Smith, I would still think that. I think it's easy to gravitate towards him because of his name and his connection to Star Trek history. But because of the stuff we talked about with the cinematography category, and what you just said, with Despite Yourself kind of being an episode that's so driven by exposition and teeing up what's coming, getting all the visual excitement out of it you could was a big feat, and they hit it out of the park. So Frakes is a really strong choice for lots of reasons. This was a tough one. I ended up going with Into the Forest I Go with Chris Byrne.
Okay.
And I did that because, like I kind of mentioned in the film editing category briefly, Into the Forest I Go, without getting too much into it for later, it's no real secret if you follow me on all kinds of things, what's coming at the end of this show.
Mm-hmm.
But Into the Forest I Go is a huge episode. It's the midway point. It's the mid-season finale. There's all kinds of resolution happening in it. Storylines are paying off. There's big emotional moments in it. We have big payoffs in the Burnham Georgiou arc, like just her dealing with what happened to Georgiou and her role in it. There's a big payoff there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big payoff with the Stamets, Spore Drive, and Culber dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Lorca is in command and at his coolest in a battle situation, in the situation he's at his most comfortable. There's incredible visual, like it's balancing all this stuff. There's character stuff. There's big set piece, like just cool visual flair, balls to the wall kind of action going on. There's Klingon stuff. Tyler having PTSD with Cornwell. Like there's so many big scenes in it, and it never feels bloated. It feels like it's constantly moving. It never feels lopsided with where its focus is. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets moments. The episode has room to breathe. It's got that great scene at the end with Laurel trying to wake up Tyler and failing. That scene's really interesting and sets up a lot of what's going to happen in the back half of the season. So it's just so full of great stuff, and it's shot uniquely. Like the shot that Jim cited in his reasoning for picking it for visual effects, the scene in the shuttle bay with Stamets and Lorca looking out of the shuttle bay and out to Pavo as they're kind of pulling away and heading back to Federation space. There's a lot of memorable imagery in it, but it's not just the imagery; it's the character moments too. And I don't want to talk too much more about it because I'm going to talk the episode later in a couple other categories. But that was my choice. I hope Chris Byrne is back. I hope they use him again in future seasons because I think he really brought it. But I think as a whole, we kind of talked about the other day in this category, it's a really well balanced representation of the directors of the show. I think we have Frakes, who needs no introduction. He's Star Trek royalty. By all accounts, he's directed countless episodes over different shows. He's obviously Riker, and then he directed feature films for Star Trek. So he's needs no explanation. And then you have Akiva Goldsman and Olatunde Asansami, who are executive producers on the show, who have a role in the day-to-day grind of the show. Got nominated for their episodes. Both directed 2 episodes. And you have Chris Byrne and TJ Scott, who are both kind of one-offs. So we don't know a whole lot about it and don't have a whole lot of history yet. And are 2 guys that I hope are back in the future. But I think this is a good representation of some of the best episodes of the season. Directing and episode often go kind of hand in hand for me. Directing and Best Picture kind of go hand in hand for the Oscars. I think they're kind of hard to separate much. Sometimes maybe you can poke some holes and make some distinctions, but they usually go pretty hand in hand for me. While I kind of take a peek at Twitter and try to pick a couple of responses, who would have been do you have a second choice? Do you have somebody that you toyed with going with instead of Frakes? Or were you pretty solid on Frakes from the beginning?
I was pretty solid. Akiva Goldsman with Context Switch of Kings was up there for me because I'm really high on that episode. And again, I think that's the reason why that was so high is because I suffer from kind of the first couple episodes of really kind of building off kind of the rest of the building on the rest of the show. So that's kind of went in that direction for sure. But yeah, I think they did a great job of bringing in, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I think they did a great job of bringing in, really talented, experienced directors, but also some new people, and that gave it a chance to feel that balance for sure.
Yeah, I agree. the Twitter response in this category is actually pretty lopsided. There's a lot of love for Frakes. People saying they wanted to pick Frakes, and some of them did. There's certainly votes for Frakes on here, but there's a lot of people who the majority of people picked What's Past His Prologue with Olatunde Asasami. Okay. That's kind of the runaway winner here. Rob, I see your tweet here for that. Jeff Stone, Captain Revo, Rachel Kirky, quite a few picks for that. I have one person here. J. Kin LV says that they were very impressed with Magic to make The Sanest Man Go Mad, which is not nominated, but thought that probably should have been, which is fair for sure. Kind of like we talked about with editing, that was certainly must have been a challenging thing to pull off with the time loop and repeating scenes. Trek on the Tube picked Frakes. Durg also picked Frakes. So seems to be a pretty runaway for Olatunde Asasami, with Frakes getting some love as well, which is certainly not surprising. What's Past His Prologue is not a huge surprise as a favorite in that category. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier as a kind of a runner-up in some other categories. The battle sequence on the ship, the hand-to-hand combat in the throne room is certainly really well staged. And on Trek Ranks, when we talked on the episode I was on, the Trek Ranks, talking about our favorite things in Discovery Season 1, Alex Perry, who was the other co-host on the show that week, talked about that scene kind of feeling like a throwback to TOS, like kind of balls to the wall, just hand-to-hand combat, people going crazy, fighting. And I agree with that. And that's certainly a memorable moment in that scene. And the battle sequence with Saru in command of the Discovery is also really, really cool. There's a lot of great moments in that episode, too. So certainly a valid pick. Chaos Area also says they voted for Ocean's Twitter. What is your Twitter handle, Chaos Area? I don't see that name on here, but I'd love to know who you are on Twitter. So let me know. But a lot of people picked Asasami. He's clearly the favorite on Twitter in this category. Moving on to Best Teleplay. So writing. We have Context is for Kings, Gretchen J. Berg, Aaron Harberts, and Craig Sweeney. We have Lethe for Joe Minoski and Ted Sullivan. Into the Forest I Go with Bowie Kim and Erica Lepolt. What's Past His Prologue with Ted Sullivan, and The Wolf Inside for Lisa Randolph. What stands out to you, Dan? Do you have a pick? Style pick?
It's tough because I would argue because teleplay is kind of a story, if I'm not mistaken, a story adapted for television. And I think that that was tough for me to pick because the whole show feels like a story or a book to me. So it's tough to pick a single episode.
I agree.
But I went with Into the Forest I Go, just because I think it has a lot going on with it, and I don't want to get into it just like you because it's definitely going to be a hot topic later on in the show. But I feel like it has just a great balance, and that's written. You can see it. The proof is in the pudding, I guess. You can see it on screen. So I think it has a balance of action, dialogue, a lot going on. And I think that's kind of a testament to the writers. And yes, I don't know what else to say about it.
I'm with you. That was my pick as well.
Okay.
I went with Into the Forest I Go. For a lot of the same reasons that I kind of talked about with directing, the reason I think that episode is such a standout is that it balances feeling final in a lot of respects, like there are things paying off. But it's also setting up what's going to come for the next 6 episodes after. Yeah. So it's not a season finale by any means. It's not wrapping up for good, but it is finding ways to pay things off that we've been following for 9 episodes at that point, while not completely closing the book. Like it's opening up new doors as well and setting things up for the story to keep going. But that's why I think it's so satisfying for me is that I feel like, man, the things that I've been invested in, I'm getting some payoff for. I'm getting some satisfaction. There's some release. Like things are paying off in a big way. It's a tough category though. I'm seeing a lot of love for What's Past His Prologue in the chat. from Rob and Thad. What's past this prologue? I'm sure in a lot of people's minds, the one of the reasons it's very popular as a choice is that speech that Saru gives. That's on the page, that's written. Doug Jones obviously kills it in his performance, but Ted Sullivan, somebody that we all know, is a big time Star Trek guy who knows what he's talking about. And that speech kind of is like a "We Are Star Trek" kind of moment, and puts the flag in the ground as a Star Trek show through and through. It might not seem like it yet. It's still kind of getting there, but that's where we're going. So that's a big moment that I think the writing really carries. But some other ones in this category, I think Lethe does a really good job of, kind of like you talked about in the editing, really balance two very different kinds of stories. They're very character driven, very introspective stories, both of them, about like the inner workings of these two characters, Burnham and Lorca, but they're very differently presented. Like they're such different styles. Burnham is going through all the science fiction stuff to get to her catharsis about what's going on in her mind with her relationship to Sarek, and why she is who she is and everything. And then Lorca is done in a much more kind of straight arrow traditional fashion, dealing with another person and more dialogue driven, just person to person drama. So I think the writing in that one's really good. A lot of really memorable scenes, good dialogue. Some of my favorite performances are in that episode. And the script certainly feeds those performances. I think of in that episode, I think of the scene in the mess hall between Tyler and Burnham, where Burnham at the end of it is kind of talking about where she is and how she's feeling, and gives that speech about all her conflicting emotions and kind of struggling with making heads or tails of what she's feeling. That's such classic Star Trek writing to me. So that one was right there. Context is for Kings sets so much stuff up, and like I talked about on Trek Ranks, and I think I've talked about as we've talked about Discovery on here as well. Context is for Kings is so good with context. Going back to it, there's so many hints and so many things in that episode that make so much more sense knowing where it's going and where it all ends up. Particularly with Lorca. Of course, like there's just so much happening in that episode that context is for Kings. Like you need the context to really know what you're looking at. So that one is another really worthy contender. It's tough, and The Wolf Inside I think is one of my favorite episodes of the season for all kinds of reasons that we talked about visually, but the Tyler payoffs with Vogue, coming to a head, I think is really impressive. That scene in Burnham's quarters that we already talked about for the visual angle of it, the way it's shot, and the way it kind of puts you right in the middle of the action is really exciting. But the dialogue is really the way that all comes to a head. The other thing I love in that episode, real quick, The Wolf Inside, the way particularly is I love the Mirror Sarek stuff on the planet where he mind melds with Burnham, and just the way that all is played and written, I think is really, really well done. It was about choices and relationships, absolutely. 100% true. People agreeing that speech is simply awesome and a big time from What's Past This Prologue. So I'm sure that's why that is a popular choice in that category. On Twitter, a lot of love for What's Past This Prologue from Justin Oser, who was a Trek FM host. Earl Grey, I believe, is his main show. But you can find him on that network here and there. Otherwise, he picked What's Past This Prologue. Rob obviously picked What's Past This Prologue. Chaos Area, you picked Lethe. And Jeff Stone also picked Lethe. So there's no real consensus there with the responses, but lots of love for those episodes. Real quick, what was your kind of runner-up? Did you have a runner-up in that category? Did you have
I have to give some love to Context is for Kings. Also into the Wolf Inside as well. I mean, it's tough. There's this is one of those categories that was kind of packed. I guess the rest
Mhm.
of the choices and categories are going to be tough choices because there's a lot of good picks out there.
Yeah,
Yep.
for sure. Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what we have here. We're going to get into some really heavy hitters. Episode, if you follow along enough, you probably know where that's going. That's how we're going to end the show. We'll certainly advocate for our fairly obvious picks. But the performances are, which we're going to get into here now, are extremely tight. Really, really tough to make heads or tails of these choices for me. I could go with almost any of them. I've gotten into heard some interesting debate on some choices that I made with the nominations. Um, we'll get into them as we hit them, but just to kick it off here, let's do best performance by a guest star. And to be clear, so everybody kind of understands where I go with this, works in my head when I'm doing this. In order to qualify for series lead, you have to be credited as a starring role in the main credits. So in this show, it's for this season, it's Sonequa Martin Green, it's Doug Jones, it's Shazad Latif, it's Anthony Rapp, Mary Wiseman, and Jason Isaacs are all qualifying actors who could be put in that category. Everybody else who appears in the show, including Michelle Yeoh, who's in the main credits as a special guest star, gets lumped into the guest star category. It doesn't have to be a one-off. It can be a recurring character, like most of these are, if not all, really.
Yep.
But that's the distinction. And of course, the other big thing to remember with this is, like all these other categories, episode specific. It's not pick your favorite actor who's in the show all the time. It's pick your favorite actor who's in the show all the time, maybe, but what episode is their best work? Like, what's the best representation of their performance on the show? Best piece of their performance. So you can say, you can pick James Frain for playing Sarek, but what episode is his standout? Mary Chieffo as Laurel. You have to pick an episode, which is the more fun, challenging side of this. It's easy to say, I love those actors or that actress. The challenge is finding the episode to match up with the choice, for me. So the nominees for Best Performance by a Guest Star are Mary Chieffo for C.V. Payson, Parabellum. Hopefully I got that right. James Frain for Lethe. Kenneth Mitchell for Into the Forest I Go. Rainn Wilson for Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. And Michelle Yeoh for Battle of the Binary Stars. Dan, before you make your pick for this category, I'm curious. I don't think I asked you this when we did the nominations. Do you think, would you have chosen episodes differently than any of these? Like, the other question that kind of goes hand in hand with this is, did I leave anybody off? Like, is there somebody out there that's a guest star on the show that you think belongs in this category, whether it's like Jane Brooke for playing Cornwell, or Chris Obie got a lot of love, who played Taku a couple of episodes. I had somebody on Twitter thought I really should have included him. Is there somebody like that should have been included? And then on top, did I choose the wrong episode for any of these people?
I don't think no one was left off. I think it was a well nominated category. But I think it's tough, especially with episodes, and that's why I like it. Choosing an episode really makes it tough. Adds a new layer to kind of the category. I think you made the right choice. I think you made the hard choice for me for the pick that I went with. So it made it easier to go with. But
Okay.
yeah, I'll during my pick I'll say what other episode I would have went with. But I went with
Okay.
yeah, I went with James Frain as Eric, and I think the reason why I did because he is such a well-known character, and I think that he's stood up and went for it, and I think he did a great job of doing a strong, consistent performance in each of the episodes that he's in. So, and he's one of those characters that also played two characters, like I guess like a lot of these characters did. A lot of these actors had just the way that the show was kind of structured. They had to play two different characters, or characters had to act as
like two different characters.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yep. So yeah, I went with Lethe. I think Will You Take My Hand could have been uh, in the running just for that
For sure.
memorable moment with Burnham. I think is
Yeah.
he does have a really hard logical exterior, but there was some emotion in there, so that's why I like that performance as well. But I think Lethe, that was like his episode, so that's why I think I agree with you on that.
I agree. Will You Take My Hand is a solid alternate choice for the episode because he does have that really good moment and it reveals like new layers to his character. Things we know are there, but getting to see, the emotion that's kind of underneath and that maybe he's comfortable letting out in comfortable company.
Yeah.
Is kind of cool to see. And that probably is my favorite scene in the finale, other than the, obviously big time moment at the very end of the episode.
Yeah.
The scene between Sarek and Burnham and Amanda on Earth is really emotionally satisfying given the arc of the show, of the season.
Yep.
So that's a solid alternate pick for the episode. But yeah, Lethe, like you said, is kind of his episode, and I had to pick that one for his nomination, at least because of the new layers it gives Sarek, and Frayne plays the shame and the undercurrent of emotion really well, all there if you know to look for it. But he's trying his best to hide it and not doing a very good job in that. It's a Vulcan who's emotional, credibly, for all kinds of reasons. He's in distress, he's hurt, he's injured, he's not himself, but he's also dealing with, a major sticking point in his past. It's something that is clearly weighing on him a lot. Said it with his eyes for sure. Chaos area. Rob is also saying Jane Brooke is an awesome guest star who I unfortunately had to leave. She probably would have been my sixth choice. I love Admiral Cornwell. She's in it a lot, actually, when you really think about it. She's a good chunk of the episodes and has a pretty big role to play. But 5 slots is tough.
Yes.
To whittle down. My choice was my Trekkie Award goes to Michelle Yeoh for Battle of Binary Stars as Captain Georgiou. My favorite moment in the pilot, like between the two episodes, The Vulcan Below and Battle of Binary Stars, is the scene in Georgiou's ready room in Battle of Binary Stars. After everything's kind of happened, Burnham's broken out of the brig. She's back on the bridge. And she's justifying her reason for trying to mutiny and trying to attack. And Burnham and Georgiou gives this speech about war. Talks about war being screams and funerals and death, and like that really sticks with me. That monologue that she gives, cautionary tale for what the reality of war is. It's easy to sit here and say this is what we should do, this is the right direction to go, and live with consequences for it's here, and trying to chart a course for where we should go. It's easy to do that, but she's been there and has seen it and knows what the consequences are. And I love the humanity in that moment coming from Michelle Yeoh. And I just love the character a lot. Like it pains me that we didn't get more of her. And I always think like it's totally credible to me that her character is like Picard's idol hero. Like I feel like she's the kind of captain who Picard would like read her captain's logs and would want to model himself after. Like she is Picard 100 years before there was Picard. And I love that. I wasn't expecting that out of the character ahead of time. I didn't know that was going to be such a distinctive character. I kind of had a feeling that it probably was going to be short-lived and she wasn't going to be around for the duration. I thought it was probably going to be a quick in and out thing. But I felt like the character was so well developed in a couple of episodes. That's a credit to Michelle Yeoh.
Yep.
But it was a tough choice. I think the question for me was, when you're going with Michelle Yeoh, is the choice Battle of Binary Stars with
Yeah, exactly.
real
That's a tough one.
Georgiou, or do you pick Vaulting Ambition or something where she's playing badass mirror Georgiou? It's a tough call. I went with the real Georgiou because I think it's more integral to the arc of the show and establishing why Burnham is struggling with everything she's struggling with, because she was such a critical point in her life and played such a big role in shaping who she was going to be. So yeah, Rainn Wilson got a lot of love on Twitter. No real surprise there.
Yeah.
He was cited a couple of times. Mary Chieffo as Laurel was cited a few times. Like I said, Trick on the Tube was fairly strongly advocating that Chris Obi belongs as the Kugma. Yeah, pretty wide range. No clear consensus. Phoenix Cass area, who's in the room with us, chose James Frand as well. Dan, they're all really good. It's a tough call, and I think that's well represented in the Twitter responses because there is no consensus. Everybody got a couple of votes, pretty much. Mary Chieffo, real quick, is another tough one for me. It was a tough one to choose an episode for because and I think we talked about this a little bit on the nomination show last week. She's really good in like brief moments in a lot of these episodes. Like she's got that really good scene in Into the Forest I Go towards the end where she's trying to unlock Tyler, and she's got a really good scene in Despite Yourself where she tries to unlock Tyler again. She's not heavily featured in a lot of those episodes. An episode where she is really heavily featured is CV Peso and Parabellum in her scenes with Cornwall. And there's a lot of layers to that. And at the time, you're not quite sure what she's trying to do. Like, she's really trying to go to Discovery? Is she just trying to play Cornwell for information and trying to be the good cop? Like, all kinds of possibilities. And that's another credit to her performance, that she's a tough nut to crack. Always. And that's an episode where I feel like she probably has, if memory serves, the most integral part of the plot. Like, she's got a lot going on. Instead of popping in for a moment here or there and scene stealing for bits. So she was in the running too. But my runner up was James Franco. He was the tough one for me to leave off. It would have been him if it wasn't for Michelle Yeoh. My book. Best series lead. Heavy category.
Yes, that's tough.
It's still tough. It's still tough for me. I'm sitting here right now and still toying with the idea of changing my mind. So you might sway me because you have the advantage of going first. Maybe the disadvantage of going first. So nominees are Doug Jones for Pass's Prologue, Shazad Latif for The Wolf Inside, Sonequa Martin Green for Lethe, Anthony Rapp for Vaulting Ambition, and Mary Wiseman for Despite Yourself. And just to throw it out there and just address it right off the top. Yes, Jason.
The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room is that Captain Lorca himself is off the list, and I feel lots of shame for that. I'm sorry for everyone who feels so passionate for that. But anybody who says that it was a mistake, I know you're out there. My question is always going to be take off. Who's the person that comes off the list? And that some people have come right back and said, "Yep, this is who I would have taken off. This is what I would have done." And that's always interesting to hear. So let me know if you think Isaacs really should be on that list, and I agree he should be. But tell me what the replacement should be, if that's a major sticking point for you. But what do you think, Dan? Who's your choice?
I'm going with Shazad Latif. It was tough.
Nice.
Yes, it was super tough for the Wolf Inside. I think that he, more than anyone, had a tough role, just the way the character was built and structured, with multiple characters to play. I like that once we do find out, there's this inner struggle, and you can see that in him. And I think he does a great job of kind of switching back and forth, and um, it's it's really cool because the like everything him as an actor, it was they asked a lot of him, and I think he performed.
Mhm.
So I loved it, loved his
Yeah,
performance.
I, I would say I agree with you that he had the toughest assignment, I think, on the show.
Mm.
He was playing, he played two characters
Yep.
consistently and earlier than anybody else.
Yes.
He was playing two characters long before they got to the mirror universe.
Yeah.
He was Voke at the very beginning, and we didn't even know it was him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't know Shazad Latif was delivering that performance
Yep.
at the very beginning, and he plays a very different character with Tyler, and somehow manages to make them one person by the end. So, and he, like I've said before, talking about our hopes kind of for what's coming and possibilities for the future. There's a really rich opportunity there for Tyler, Vogue, Shazad Latif, to explore like a new angle of this character who's exploring their humanity and trying to figure out what humanity is and what it means to be a person that Star Trek always kind of has with Spock or Odo or Data, 7 of 9. They always have these characters, and this is a whole new way to approach that conversation.
Yep.
That kind of character. So I really hope that there's more coming.
Yes.
From Shazad Latif, because he clearly showed that he can bring it and kicks butt every time he's given an opportunity. So I'm hoping that he's around in the future. And he was my runner-up in this category.
Okay.
I toyed really hard with picking him at a certain point during the season. He would have been my choice for the Wolfen side. But I am going to go with Doug Jones for What's Past His Prologue. And it's easy to point to the speech and to like just cite that one scene, and that scene is awesome for all kinds of reasons. But he sells the arc of that character as well as anybody could. When you think back to where he was in the Below, not wanting to go on the flyby with Burnham because he was too afraid.
Yeah.
He sells the turn in What's Past His Prologue, where he's put in a position to be in command and go into a battle situation and not turn the other cheek and not be afraid and to have confidence in the people around him. And it's such a classic Star Trek character journey that Saru went on in just one season. Like,
I love, people always say, especially with actors, they like to focus on kind of how they deliver the dialogue. Yeah. But a lot of people don't forget about like the other acting they have to do with posture and kind of all that stuff. So I think Doug Jones is kind of one of those kind of actors where he acts not just with his dialogue. So that's why I think he's up there for me too as well.
Absolutely. On Trek Ranks a couple weeks ago when I recorded it, I talked a lot about we had to choose our favorite performance, not by episode, but by season. So the flip side of this. And I also picked Doug Jones for that, for all the kind of reasons I just talked about with the arc and the way he sells the arc. But I did talk a lot about that as well, the physical side of his performance. I think he's the most credible alien that we've ever had in Star Trek because of his posture, the body type, the way he walks, the way his tics and little body motions that he does, like everything about him, not human.
Yep.
And it's an amazing performance. And What's Past His Prologue is just the culmination of it. You get great stuff all the way through it in episodes like In the Vulcan Hello and Battle of Binary Stars. Great at the beginning of that arc. Character who's very, very afraid and is consistently afraid all the way through. In episodes like CV, Pacem, Parabellum, he's really dealing with that.
Yeah.
Huge pain. He's still struggling with it. You get a lot of that all the way through, but What's Past His Prologue really culminates everything that all the breadcrumbs he's kind of laid out all through the season and pays it all off really well, to the point where we're all sitting here rooting for him to be the captain. Like we all got behind him and want him to be the captain. We're
gonna follow him into battle.
Yeah. Like, and that tells you how I think great he is. In the beginning of the show, I think when he's saying, no, I'd rather not go on that away mission. because it's dangerous. Like that, how anti-Trek is that compared to like what we've seen in the past, where our hero crew members are always, I'll go. I'm happy to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with my crewmate and put my life on the line. Like it's never a question. And then we get this character who at the beginning of season 1 is like, no, I'm not going out. To credibly go from there to we want him to be the captain and we want to serve under him is a credit to Doug Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So my Trekkie Award goes to Doug Jones for What's Past His Prologue, but Shazad Latif is right there. I toyed with Sonequa Martin Green and Lethe. My struggle with Sonequa Martin Green was because she's so integral and she is the lead and she's got so many powerhouse episodes.
Mm-hmm.
What episode to choose? Do you think I picked the right episode? Do you think there's another episode where she is more impressive? I'm not sold 100% on that's the one. That's the one I landed on and just did like pencils down. I had to pick one. But there's a case to be made for quite a few, I think.
Yeah, I think so. My number 2 was not nominated. But I could definitely get behind Sonequa Martin Green. I think Will You Take My Hand is a strong one for her also.
Agreed.
So yeah. I mean she has a lot of great episodes, but yeah.
Yeah, Will You Take My Hand was definitely in the conversation.
Into the Forest I Go too.
Into the Forest I Go.
Yeah.
What's Past His Prologue? I think she's got a lot of good stuff, a lot of foreign loyalty, and put in a tough position. Even in the pilot, What's Past the Vulcan Hello and Battle of Binary Stars, she's got some great stuff. You know, one of my favorite scenes with her is in Battle of Binary Stars, where she pulls the Kirk maneuver and out logics the computer into letting her out.
Yeah.
I think that's such a classic Star Trek scene that harkens all the way back to TOS, and she really pulls it off.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, she was a tough one to narrow down an episode for.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question for you and for everybody out there, Groppler Zorn, I know you're a big Jason Isaacs advocate. You're one of the people that grilled me for leaving him off. If Jason Isaacs was on this list, what would his episode
be? I don't know, because like I feel like with Context is for Kings, I think his performance just gets amplified once you know.
Right.
So that's tough. That's a super tough question. I don't know.
It's for me. It was Context is for Kings.
Yep.
I think Lethe is another one. I think he's really good in Lethe.
Yeah.
Similar to Context is for Kings, that performance changes with the information that you get.
Yep.
I think he's really heroic in a weird way, and Into the Farce I Go. I think that's the closest we get to like he's more militant, he's more aggressive, questionable than the traditional Star Trek captain, but he maybe comes the closest to like he's our captain, and Into the Farce I Go. You kind of really want him to be the hero in command in a battle situation. But I think Context is for Kings and Choose Your Pain might offer him his best meat to chew on. Choose Your Pain, I think of the scene with Mudd in the brig land ship where it's revealed all the brand stuff and again, that's another one. Oh, that's the thing with him. Like everything you see in the first half of the season and in the first couple episodes of the back half of the season, there's more than meets the eye, which I'm talking myself into feeling more stupid for not nominating him because
I was gonna say, so
much.
why wasn't he nominated?
I don't know. I didn't know who to leave off, and I don't know how I landed on Isaac in the one to leave off. I think I talked about in the nomination video that I was torn between Rapp and Wiseman and Isaacs. Like I could only
those three are mine. They could go either way.
Yeah. I knew I was gonna. There was no way I was leaving Doug Jones, Steve, or Sonequa Martin Green off. Like they were home free. They were easy. The episodes for the first two, I knew right away Doug Jones's episode. I knew Shazad Latif's episode. Sonequa Martin Green, the only question was the episode.
Yeah.
And Rapp, Wiseman, and Isaacs were. I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And Grappler Zoran says his Context is for Kings is, I guess, the episode he would have chosen for Isaacs and his best episode pick, which we're about to get.
Yeah, I think that's probably his best episode, probably.
Yeah. I think probably too.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by what Context did for that episode.
Yeah.
In hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on into our last category, which for us is fairly obvious, but still looking forward to talking about it and kind of going through how close of a call it is for us. Nominees for Best Episode, Star Trek Discovery Season 1. I have Context is for Kings, Lethe, Into the Forest I Go, What's Past is Prologue, and The Wolf Inside. What do you think?
So my pick for best episode is Into the Forest I Go, because I think it's got the perfect balance of standalone episode and also some serialized elements working in. I think it has great drama with a lot of character interaction, but there's also some great action sequences and also some great sci-fi concepts that just fit right at home here.
Yeah, the Trekkie Award for Star Trek Discovery Season 1 goes to, for Best Episode, Into the Forest I Go. That's, if you listen to Trek Ranks, you knew that already.
Mm-hmm.
I've asked, I think we talked about at the end of pretty much every episode of Discovery, is this the best one so far? And what's your favorite so far? Was a question that we frequently ended our conversations on as we were going through the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And Into the Forest I Go pretty safely stayed on top after it aired for both of us.
Yep.
So it shouldn't be a big surprise if you've watched us for any period of time. But yeah, for all the stuff I talked about when we did direct writing, it's such a monumental episode for the series. I think where it pays off these big storylines. There's resolution with the Burnham Georgiou. There's really not like final resolution. You're tricked into believing that final resolution there, because when you get to the mirror universe, it like reopens the wound, and there's more to it to explore. But if we didn't go to the mirror universe, like if that never happened, it would have been a fitting and satisfying wrap up to that dynamic. I think so. I'm glad that there was more to explore there, but it fooled us into thinking that this was it, because it was satisfying. I think.
Yep.
Like she got some satisfaction for what happened, and there's just so many great things in that. I think of the visuals, like I said, of the Discovery micro jumping around. The ship of the dead is just so cool and so different. Something we've never seen in Trek from like a battle scene perspective, and the fight between Burnham and Cole on the bridge of the ship of the dead is so cool, so badass. It's the twist that happens at the end with Stamets is really well done. Could go anywhere. Like obviously now, the season kept going, but at the time it was like, where are they going with this? It was such like an open window, and it's got the killer ending where they don't know where they're at. It's a great cliffhanger. There's, I feel like I'm repeating because we've talked about the episode a lot in these big categories, writing and directing. But it was a fairly easy pick for me. It's been my favorite episode since it aired. It never came off that top of the list.
Yep, same here.
I think it does it all. I think it's classic Star Trek.
Yep.
That kind of brings all kinds of angles. It's got great character stuff. It's got great action stuff. It's got world building, adds to the texture of the series in it. It's all working in it. All the characters get good moments, things to do. They all get like a highlight. Kenneth Mitchell is so good as Cole in it. I nominated him for guest actor. Didn't talk about him a whole lot in that category, but he's great. Really imposing, incredible Klingon. I guess my question to you is, what's your second choice?
Picking the initial episode was pretty easy for me, but picking my like 2, 3 is tough.
Yeah.
I think it's Context is for King is my second, probably.
Yeah.
I think, especially when you factor in the kind of rewatchability and what you know, and I think that's definitely.
Right.
I feel confident in saying that that's my number 2.
Very cool.
Yep.
My number 2 was The Wolf Inside, but Context is for Kings is like a strong 3.
Yep.
2 and 3, Wolf Inside and Context is for Kings are.
Yep.
There's a reasonably sizable gap between Into the Farce I Go and those 2 episodes for me.
Yeah.
Fairly soon, I'm going to be putting out. I think I haven't totally decided how or when I'm going to do it, but I did. For those who have followed me for any period of time, I ranked every episode of Star Trek, regardless of series. I have like a 1 to 707 ranking of everything put together, and I did fold the 15 episodes of Discovery into that ranking. And I do want to put that out at some point here. The question is just how to do it, so that it makes sense and you can see what I'm doing, because it's such a big document. But on that ranking, Into the Farce I Go is a clear cut like top 100 episode of Star Trek, and the others there's a reasonable gap until you get to The Wolf Inside and Context is for King.
Yeah.
But those 2 are close together.
Yes.
My number 4 would be What's Past Is Prologue, and my number 5 would be Lee.
Okay.
I guess the question for you is there an episode that I left off? I know what like the Twitter community would say, because Magic to Make the Saints Man Go Mad is such a popular episode on Twitter among the fans. I'm a little bit cooler on it than maybe some are. I love it. I think it's great. It's in the upper half of the episodes for me. It would maybe be 7 or 8 in my book. But is there one that you would have worked into that list?
I maybe Choose Your Pain. Maybe Will You Take My Hand? A lot of people aren't big on it, especially as a season finale. I really enjoyed it. So that's definitely up there for me too. But I think overall, I think it's a really strong list, and I think it's a testament to how many good episodes there are in this first season.
Yeah.
Especially, yeah.
Couldn't agree more. There are more really good episodes than weak. There are some episodes that I'm a little cooler on now that I've gone back and watched them again. That I'll certainly reveal as I put that ranking out. That'll make itself clear. But of the 15 episodes, I would say 13 of them fall in the it's a good episode range. Like a good episode of Star Trek, I think it falls in the good chunk. And there's a couple that I would maybe push further down the list that would be in the more weak range. Now that time has gone by and there's some hindsight. If you paid attention, you probably know what one of them is. One of them would be. There's another that I'll again reveal in time. But it's tough. I when I think of like I'm trying to think of what would have been like on my list, like what just missed, and Despite Yourself is probably the one that I struggled with leaving off, and just couldn't find a way to get in there. But real quick, the Twitter response on that one was very mixed, like no consensus at all. Justin Oster picked What's Past Is Prologue. Groppler Zorn, who's in the room, and Beta's Case already in here. Context for Kings. Duncan Barrett, who is a co-host of
one of our favorites.
Primitive Culture on Trek FM. Chose Lethe and was passionate about it. Carlos Miranda, who works on Trek News, the website, if memory serves. Let's see if it's right on here.
And he's been working with the Tricorder Transmissions also, maybe.
He's been on Trek Ranks a couple of times. He said Lethe. Rob, who good friend of the show and in the room right now, went with What's Past Is Prologue. Jeff Stone, Lethe, Robert Abrams, Into the Forest I Go, agrees with us.
Yep.
Durg, Into the Forest I Go as well. And Rising Phoenix, also in the room still, I think, Chaos Area, went with Lethe. So there's love in the room for Lethe, love Go with Prologue. Context is for Kings. And I know out there, if I would have, when I've asked the question, what's your favorite episode of the season, it even opens it up more. Like putting out a list of 5 and these nominees kind of narrows that discussion and limits the answers to just those 5. But if you just widely say what's your favorite episode of the season, you get all kinds of other responses, like Magic Make the Sandsman Go Mad, Fight Yourself, and I know Choose Your Pain has a lot of love out there. The Vulcan Hello has a lot of love out there. So there's all kinds of, will you take my hand? I know there. So again, like you said, it's a testament to how good the season is and how wide ranging the really solid, really good episodes are. There's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, because it's also Star Trek too, because there are episodes in Past Trek that people aren't high on. It's there's an episode for everybody, and that's what I feel like is a constant theme throughout Discovery also.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the Trekkie Awards, 29th edition. Looking forward to talking more about it in the future. Maybe talking more seasons, the choices that I've had in the past, and getting feedback from people on those groups of nominees. So, yeah. Grappler's Orange says that C+ Trek is A+ television, and I could not agree more. That is my standing order. It is the truth. I always say that when I'm like, if I were to ever wink start rewatching Star Trek on Twitter again, I always kind of kick it off with making the point that Star Trek is still like the best of television for me. Like it's, a C in Trek does not equal like C television in the general world out there. It's still the best.
Yep.
Rob, you don't want to run down of our outfits. If we both stood up right now, you wouldn't see anything. We're not wearing full suits. This is just the upper half. Not to reveal. It is not Versace. It's nothing that impressive. Dan's a little classier than me with the bow tie. I'm
a big bow tie fan. Yep.
So credit to Dan for being bold and going with the bow tie. Yeah. So, but it was fun. It was fun to go Oscar style and go a little more formal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob. I love bow ties.
I love it too.
Yeah, should we wrap it up? Or it must be. Yes. So that's been, like Bill said, that was the award show. We'll be back to kind of regularly scheduled Trek Live programming next week with a recap of season 1 of Discovery, kind of our overall thoughts, and kind of our season 2 wants and needs, I guess, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and stopping by. Definitely use the hashtag if you have any more thoughts about it. Come on to Discord, Twitter. Discussion does not stop here. You guys know the drill. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks everybody for stopping by and participating and sharing your thoughts. It's what makes it worth doing. Thank you.